truth, responsibility, trust, and celebration. And these are all important factors in deepening intimacy, which means in Latin, the imprint or the impressions that we leave upon one another. And so now we start to break down, okay, we understand love as an actual set of actions, shared values, and communications that create intimacy, which is a shared impression that we leave upon one another as we imprint these different experiences and relational patterns between one another that then shape us to either transcend trauma, but even more so go into optimizing our relationship and ourselves as an individual so that no matter what direction the relationship goes, both are moved forward towards where they're supposed to be, left better than they were when they first met, whether that's together or separate. And frankly, in that sense, it doesn't matter if the relationship is based on more of a one night stand, if it is like a 6 month short term type of romance or a lifelong together.
Embodied love is also our deep capacity to be in our own body in a loving way and be so deeply present with all that is that makes up me, and that I become the primary, I become my own beloved. And there's this truth and responsibility and like all of that, but with myself going on. It's really crucial to have that self-love and to have that self-love practice. So a lot of my work that I've done has been to support people to deepen. And for me, love is profound respect. So if there's no respect, there's no love. So that's one of my definitions of love. So that cultivation of profound respect for oneself, one's own heart, mind, body, and then extending that profound respect to those in our lives is an act of love. But we can't really do that if we don't feel it for ourselves. I think we might have infatuation, we might have admiration, but when you're really challenged and something's intense, are you still respecting deeply yourself in those moments? And can you deeply offer, respect to other and really be there in a way that's curious and grounded and open and willing to learn and grow? Because that's one thing I've also noticed is there is a growth process. And so there's like a birthing of like, ooh, the celebratory part of all of this loving, but then there's also the death part where you really do need to confront yourself. And so we provide those skills they're very simple skills. Some of them, like nervous system regulation. You can't even have a conversation if you're not present.
Welcome to the Soulful Sound Podcast, where you will find conscious, inspiring content to support your healing and transformation. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I want to extend a heartfelt invitation for you to be part of our community, where more insightful conversations await to guide you to heal, grow, and thrive. Simply click the subscribe button. It means the world to me, and your engagement is a big part of us reaching the hearts of other beautiful souls like you. Thank you so much for joining. Sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are. Welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode on the Soulful Sound Podcast. I'm joined by the beautiful Dr. Saida Désilets and awesome Aaron Michael, MA, who are the founders of Embodied Love University, which is a global platform dedicated to making intimacy simple. Their 40 years plus experience, combined with their scientifically proven methodologies, is revolutionizing intimacy, relationship, and sex coaching for both individuals and couples. And with 3 published books, over 20 online courses, bespoke programs, and the Embodied Love Lounge podcast, they are changing how the world makes love. Welcome in, Aaron.
Wow,
Saida.
what an announcement. I feel like I walked into a royal court and just got, all my titles thrown out there.
I love that. I get that often when I start these podcasts. Everyone's like, wow, I didn't expect that intro. And I'm like, well, I'm honoring you right from the start. So all the beautiful work you're doing now. You guys are so, so, so beautiful and a really beautiful part of my life. And I'm so honored to bring you back on. I've had you on individually, talking about your work, and to have you on together. What a treat we're in for today. So, I top and tail most of my episodes with the personal story. And the
Mm.
first thing really is, now I've asked you both your personal stories before, and I'm going to be linking our previous episodes here for our guests. So I'd like to frame your story in how you came together in this sacred journey that you're doing together now. And you can talk about that within whatever framework you like, but just around how you came together to do the work you're doing today. If you can start, Saida, that would be great.
Sure.
Yeah.
There are many layers to this story. And since you're a person who likes the layers and likes the nuances, I think one of the first interesting things, and I'm sure Aaron will mention it, but I appeared to him in a dream and we were working together. And then fast forward quite a few years later in Greece, we were teaching our very first play shop together. And Aaron's like, this is exactly what was happening in my dream. So I think we came together on mission long before we ever met. And then when we did meet, it was mission based right away. I was contacted by a mutual client of ours, and she was like, "You two need to meet. You're actually in his book." I'm like, "Who's this person?" And then over time, working with Aaron, I started to realize, wow, this man is extraordinary, and his wisdom and his knowledge is ahead like 100 years, and I want to support that to come out. So then the next level of collaboration was actually to support his work to get recorded, and so we created some online courses, initially just really him on camera and me supporting, and then eventually we created one together for couples, and that was really fun. And then we went on to create one together for women, so that was also really fun. And so it's just been a lot of fun, a lot of creativity. And one of the biggest projects that we did was having our work collaborating together to create a protocol. And that protocol was examined and rigorously tested through a scientific method by people from actually in your Lake of the Woods, the London Imperial College. And the results were so astounding that people didn't quite know what to do with them. And that's what the platform really, we realized the reason things are working so well is that it's a complete system based on tried and true methodologies that really fit so, so well together. So I have the privilege of loving this beautiful person, and also the privilege of invoking and playing with one another's genius on a regular basis.
That's beautiful. Oh, yes, yes to all of that. And I love the fun that comes up every time you express it. So there is definitely a lot of fun and pleasure and joy, and we know how important that is, and we'll talk about that some more as we go on. So over to you, Aaron. What was your version of the story of coming together?
Well, I had basically been looking in the sexual wellness industry broadly for people to be collaborating with. And one of the first people I collaborated with was a midwife out of Denmark who just does some amazing work, great work on trauma, body knowledge, and has ultra high standards. I mean, to the point that eventually I said, look, I know all the critiques of everybody out in the field, and I understand the validity behind it, but is there anybody who then you would actually recommend to potentially collaborate with, or someone that you would respect? And she named two people. One was Sina Benson. And so the midwife's name is Susanna Worsko. And she named Sina Benson, who was the former head of Sexology Union in Denmark. She said that she was well researched and that she really did like her homework on different things. And then she pulled out a book and this lady, and then pulled out what was it called? Emergence of the Sensual
Yeah.
Woman. And it's a book on her jade egg practice, which when that first came out, I mean, this revolutionized the practice around jade egg mastery. This also gave birth to, I mean, like anyone that's laying down that does jade egg practice comes from her, even
Mm.
whether they know it or not. And so there was this big kind of surge of knowledge, especially with Taoism, and then branching that into the mainstream and how this gets understood in terms of like sex, intimacy, and relationship in these practices. So she was really the founder of that movement, especially for women. And so then when she showed me this book, I was like, okay. And she had gone to maybe a workshop with her and it was signed by her maybe 15 years or so. And since she's now mentioned it, much later, probably about a year and a half so later, I had a dream that I was in one of those kind of old school rooms with the little wooden desks that fold up and down and the green chalkboard. And so in she walks, signals over to me. I get up from the desk. I lay down on my back, position her onto my hips, and we start moving and breaking down like all the different body mechanics, in and out, the system of pleasure and how penetration works, and specifically around how to generate pleasure. And then the more that I dug into her work with desire, her book on desire, and how that works in terms of also her psychological frameworks and the fact that she has a doctorate and really holds these high standards, this was somebody that I definitely wanted to be collaborating with. And so then I, by I don't say it's just luck, serendipity, fortunate coincidence. There was a mutual student of hers that had had some bespoke coaching with me, and she actually suggested that I talk to Saida. I'm like, that's interesting. I just had this dream. So she tries to get her on a call with me, and later she ends up telling me that she had kind of told the lady on the side, it's like, who's this another yoni masseuse guy? And but then when we spoke, I'm like on Zoom and I'm like, so I'm just gonna tell it to you straight. Here's my backstory. Here's why I'm reaching out because I have a part of you in the book. I'd like, to really make sure that that's accurate and has the correct links to all of your work. But in addition, I had this dream. Kind of just threw it out there. Who knows how she was going to react? And actually, she found it very inspiring. And then from that moment forwards, we have collaborated on many works. And really, this joint effort of ELU, after just seeing the lifelong list of courses, books, and works that she's done, and then also mine that cover, everything from intimacy and communication to relational patterns, as well as the actual biomechanics of sex, all geared around pleasure, as well as her geared around pleasure and desire. And the fact that she's also working with professionals, we just decided this is an obvious thing that all this material, as opposed to being on different pages as different offers, needs to come together as an entire life journey if we're wanting to create the impact that we wish to on a societal level, which is, as you said, making intimacy simple and specifically changing the way the world makes love. Because if love is the answer, then learning how to actually make love in the act, as well as in our communication and in our shared values, is the key towards, well, creating a different foundation for families, children, and society to be based upon.
Beautiful. I mean, if you need a sign that you need to come together and collaborate, I mean, it's been coming at you both in so many different ways. And I love how these, like you kind of say, synchronicities, or, not coincidences, but the way things drop in for us to notice. And I think for you both, knowing you, how intuitive and aware you are in space, that, those messages came through hot and fast. And I think what a cool dream. Hey, by the way, oh, that's amazing. So now I love what you shared at the end there, Aaron, about love. And I know that the work that you're doing, you use the words embodied love. And I want people out there to hear your versions of what embodied love actually means. And the reason I'm gonna ask that question is my experience of you both is very much an embodied and lived experience of your work. Your presence alone, without necessarily speaking or sharing, has a frequency and energy, and that's a space I love to play in, that invites curiosity and invites a currency of pleasure in people around you. And I find that super fascinating. So for me, for that to happen, there is an embodiment that has to happen. So talk to me about embodied love.
Well, it starts off with, and why we actually came up with this term embodied love was that, first of all, my master's was roughly on love, the culture around love, the bioscience around love, and then specifically the interactions that happen. And one of the first things I had to do is, well, how do you even define love? And a lot of literature kind of breaks it into three categories: lust, romance, and a committed relationship. And those don't really seem to function or fit together all too well. It seems like when one goes up, the other goes down, and the other one's completely forgotten, or vice versa, something like that. Now, when most people think of love, they're typically speaking of a certain feeling. And they're hoping that that feeling is what's going to carry them onwards and upwards into a relationship. But as you know, feelings change. And so some of the fundamentals of longer lasting love is that it actually needs to be backed with actions, both physical interaction, which, hey, there's sex. There's
Yeah.
also needs to be communicative interaction, which is both body and verbal, but then also having a set of shared values. And so when speaking about embodied love, it is specifically looking at, well, what are the various actions in sex, intimacy, and relationship, and the interactions that actually create love. So, how do we, in that sense, then, in our bodies, not just feelings and heads, we start to become mindful of the way that we make love in those three different spheres primarily. And I would say, even to break it down a little farther, there's a cycle that we speak of a lot when it comes to embodied love, and that is truth, responsibility, trust, and celebration. And these are all important factors in deepening intimacy, which means in Latin, the imprint or the impressions that we leave upon one another. And so now we start to break down, okay, we understand love as an actual set of actions, shared values, and communications that create intimacy, which is a shared impression that we leave upon one another as we imprint these different experiences and relational patterns between one another that then shape us to either transcend trauma, but even more so go into optimizing our relationship and ourselves as an individual, so that no matter what direction the relationship goes, both are moved forward towards where they're supposed to be, left better than they were when they first met, whether that's together or separate. And frankly, in that sense, it doesn't matter if the relationship is based on more of a one night stand, if it is like a 6 month short term type of romance or a lifelong together.
Mm, mm, beautiful. Oh, gosh, there's so many nuggets. I'm like jotting notes down, which I'm going to come back to. Over to you, Saida, embodied love.
Well, there's two things. There'll be my perspective coming into this, but also my lived experience with Aaron. And so, as I'll speak to the lived experience first. As you know me very well. We're very close friends for a long time. You've seen me go through big relational things. And what impressed me the most in relating with Aaron is that he truly did embody love. He really does speak his truth and desire my truth. It's something he really values, and so that's become easier. It's not an easy thing for me to reveal myself, but it's become easier to speak it. He's incredibly responsible with his truth, but also with my own, which is something that's a huge gift because it's very rare to have that. Not only is he responsible in the moment of the sharing, he will actually, for a few days or a few weeks, be really deepening his contemplation and coming back with nuggets of wisdom and beauty that he's understanding from the share, which is I just wanted to point like those two facets of the cycle he was saying about is something that was very foreign to me and I had not experienced other than really my relationship with you, Simone, because you've been a huge healer of my heart and emotional integrity. So that's the piece I want to say about my lived experience, which matters to me because when someone is teaching this work, if they don't actually walk their talk, then I don't want to hear about it. He really walks his talk. And then being brought into this framework, I was like, I completely love this. I've just never had the opportunity to really flex this with anyone. So I just wanted to say that piece. From my standpoint and my work and my entire, really my whole life journey, embodied love is also our deep capacity to be in our own body in a loving way and be so deeply present with all that is that makes up me and that I become the primary. I become my own beloved. And there's this truth and responsibility and like all of that, but with myself going on. It's really crucial to have that self-love and to have that self-love practice. So a lot of my work that I've done has been to support people to deepen. And for me, love is profound respect. So if there's no respect, there's no love. So that's one of my definitions of love. So that cultivation of profound respect for oneself, one's own heart, mind, body, and then extending that profound respect to those in our lives is an act of love. But we can't really do that if we don't feel it for ourselves. I think we might have infatuation, we might have admiration, but when you're really challenged and something's intense, are you still respecting deeply yourself in those moments? And can you deeply offer, respect to other and really be there in a way that's curious and grounded and open and willing to learn and grow? Because that's one thing I've also noticed is there is a growth process. And so there's like a birthing of like, ooh, the celebratory part of all of this loving. But then there's also the death part where you really do need to confront yourself. And so we provide those skills they're very simple skills. Some of them, like nervous system regulation. You can't even have a conversation if you're not present, and you can't be present if you're dysregulated. So number one thing that we do a lot is teach people how to do that for themselves, but also how co-regulation works. This is a really big one, and it translates into really great lovemaking, actually, when you understand that your presence and what's arising in you and what you're cultivating in yourself is the offering, is the gift, is what is creating the transformation.
Yummy. So beautiful. Yes, absolutely. I'd love to hear a little bit more on the celebration. I know you both spoke about the values, truth, responsibility, trusting, and respect in your values. Talk about the celebration piece of it.
Well, my favorite way to celebrate is with great sex. So so if you do a scenario, maybe something's upsetting me and I come forward with my truth, not as a blaming, just this is what's true arising in this moment for me and what I know to be true in this moment, but being responsible with it, recognizing maybe I don't have the whole picture yet. And this person's going to listen, also being responsible. Like, I'm not going to keep this person in a little box, but I am listening deeper than just the words. And then because that happened, trust is built between the two. And then the obvious celebration for me is like physical connection, kissing, playing, making love. Like, so that is one form of celebration I absolutely love. But I mean, there's many forms of celebration, but that one I think is high on my list.
Yes, I'm sure. And you, Aaron,
I
celebration.
would break, well, I mean, that whole cycle of embodied love, truth, responsibility, trust, and celebration. And since we're talking specifically about celebration, they refer to all three of those different categories, which is sex, intimacy, and relational shared values. So an example of celebration when it comes to sex would be an orgasm. And The truth would be a person expressing their body, showing you what it is that they like or don't, and being able to respond to it, which creates that deeper bodied trust, which then allows the bodies to go into deeper surrender, take another person into deeper pleasure, and then you have amazing orgasms or just sustained extended periods of pleasure. And then that whole cycle starts again. And the celebration gets deeper and deeper when you do it in a way that isn't just about routines. Okay, I've now decoded how they are. I've done the conquest. And so now I'm just going to rinse and repeat versus a lifelong discovery, which, gets into suction sex. Whereas with in the area or the arena of intimacy and specifically communication, that is taking the time to really discover, like, okay, well, we have a conversation where she tells me something that's been going on for her. I take my time, like she mentioned, to really think about it, feel into it. And this is one of the keys that I really love about Saida. And I think this is where she was speaking about that internal work, that internal truth, responsibility, trust, and celebration, in that she embodies love towards herself. Then I can trust the truth that she's saying to me and understand that she has a high degree as well of going, okay, am I triggered? Is this something that you're causing? Is something internal on myself? Which then allows for the proper responsibility, creates deeper trust with us. And then we have this feeling of closeness, having learned more about one another, having gone through either a conflict or even kind of figured out how to even get better at something that we already are doing amazingly. So that would be celebration on a communication intimacy level. It's that imprint that we leave on one another. And all of a sudden now I feel like a man who better sees himself as well as a partner that can better provide, and vice versa for her as well. So all of a sudden now I show up in the world very differently because of the impression that she makes on me. So that to me is a celebration. Now, in terms of the relationship sphere with shared values, well, I mean, for instance, we put it together. We want to create an impact in the sexual wellness industry. We want to not just reshape it, but take over it and actually direct it in a direction that isn't just about toys, lubes, influencers, and therapy or overcoming dysfunction, but really how does it become part of everyday's household lives? And so when we expressed that we wanted to do that, we started to build the material. We've had to really trust that how is this really all coming together? And then now sitting here with the podcast, because of our shared values, this is a celebration. It feels really good to be bringing this gift out into the world. So that's a quick example of, how celebration and that cycle of embodied love works on different spheres. And those three spheres really must synergize together, because if you look at what destroys or makes a relationship aside from finances is shared pleasure and sex, good shared communication, and long-term shared values.
Beautiful. Well, I'm so honored to be part of this celebration and being able to celebrate you both in the amazing work you're doing. Let's take it into the teaching space, because so far it's super clear to me. And of course, while I know you, but those listening will hear the common values, the shared values, and the the love between you. And when you're in that teaching space, as you were speaking, Aaron, you went through the cycle like a circle. So with someone who loves frameworks and formulas, and because I think grounding things need that simplicity, is there an order in that kind of truth, responsibility, trust, and celebration that you teach or take people through? Or is it indeed a cycle where you can start anywhere on that map when you're working with clients, whether that's in a group setting or bespoke, you decide, I don't mind.
Well, so this image first came to me actually as seasons. So if you look at the seasons of a relationship, I kind of put the first one as summer, when it's all like, woohoo, you're talking to each other, you're throwing out your truths, you're finding out how you're similar. That seems really amazing. And then comes the opportunity for being responsible. Maybe you decide to like become a unit. And so then you put responsibility in fall, you start to, make sure that you've taking care of all the different planting and everything else, and you're making sure that everything's growing appropriately, and then you even get to the time where then you've like harvested now in the fall to then get ready for the winter time, which is that bit of trust now where all of a sudden, all the things that seem so amazing at the beginning and you've shown your responsibility, but maybe you run into certain difficulties or challenges. And then you go through that, and all of a sudden, boom, spring happens, new life comes, you go into this celebration, which then allows for deeper truths. And so I saw it really as what are the cycles of a relationship? And this is important because it really depends on who you're speaking to and with whom the relationship is living. So the more that you can start to understand the individuals where they're at, as well as that relational unit, what season they're in, certain things are going to need to be emphasized, but always having an understanding of the cycle, because they do create a synergy. And even if it is understanding, well, sometimes truths aren't getting spoken or they're getting gaslit. And so then that creates a lack of responsibility. Or maybe the truth is being said, but there's no responsibility, which is creating distrust, which is then also starting to do the opposite of celebration, which is fights and conflicts. And so no matter how that wheel spins in what direction, whether the impression is good or negative, it gives a very quick model to be able to understand that, one, this isn't just a linear process, and two, that there is a cycle that happens, and it often can feel like you're in the same loop, even if you have started to make the big shifts until that transformation really takes place.
So
Beautiful. Yes.
you can start anywhere. I'll just give a scenario, however. Say this is fairly common. Couples will come and they're a little bit disheartened with what's happening in the bedroom, and they're not quite sure how to rejuge everything and get it all revved up. Sometimes before you go to truth, because there hasn't been fun, you need some celebration first. So that verbally could just be like, what are the things you do appreciate and adore about this human? And often we don't do that. So in the doing of that, you start opening the heart again a little bit, because you're in that celebratory, like, actually do admire this person and I do find them attractive. And so that remembering of, oh gosh, like who am I, who's actually here, not just all the problems in my head. So starting in a therapeutic setting, sometimes appreciation is a really good place prior to going into truth. Because if I know that you actually still see me, I'll be more willing to hear your truth than if I feel like, what's the point? You don't see me anyways, and I don't want to hear what you have to say. So that's where it would be a little bit different, because the cycle we described ended with celebration. But here I'm starting in a therapy setting, starting with celebration. Then I can move into truth, because now I know that he admires me. He knows I admire him. So we can talk about what's difficult. And then we can be guided to how can we be responsible with what was just shared? What does that look like? And a simple way could just be when your partner is sharing something difficult, you need to self-regulate. That's a very responsible way of listening. Okay, this just, let my belly soften, let my breath deepen, unclench my fists, relax my jaw, lean in and get curious. So those things are responsible behaviors in the listening of a person's truth. And then in doing that, when your partner can feel like, oh, I can say difficult things and they're not trying to either run away or rip my throat out, but they're just here with me, it rekindles a sense of trust in that moment. So you can see it. It's so beautiful when couples remember each other in that sense. And then when they leave, they're usually more keen on leaning into celebration. A lot of our bespoke work, we don't just stay there. However, we do take people through multiple cycles so they get used to what that feels like And I would say this is like adulting relationship and what that feels like. And then we anchor it in the body. Like there's ways to connect the bodies, how to breathe together, touch each other, look at each other, move together, that creates that same sense of celebration. Like I see you, I feel you, truth, that's working, that's not working, like body opening, closing, like speaking through the body. And then the responsibility of, oh, okay, they want faster, slower, whatever it is that they're wanting. And then feeling sometimes when something's hard and you can make love, the trust comes back because it's like, oh, we're in this together. And so the trust can be built purely by the generating pleasure together and really understanding how to do that. And it is a skill set. It's not just about, the basic way we learned to have sex. There's different ways to be together that actually can increase those things. And then if you do move into a more heightened state of pleasure or even orgasmic state, that's actually very healthy for the relationship individually and also for the usness. And so that's a lot where our coaching will come in. And often, though, when you start to then reopen and it gets really amazing, then we have another layer of challenge, which I think Aaron can speak to, because it's not the pain parts that actually are the most difficult for couples. It's, oh my gosh, what do we do when we feel really amazing? Because sometimes people have a ceiling on how good they can feel together, and then they'll do something to kind of sabotage that. So I'd love you to pipe up
Yeah.
on the pleasure is often what you've seen in your coaching as the difficult side.
I can, and I would love to know more about that actually, please.
Well, I mean, my work started off dealing predominantly with people that were suffering from various forms of trauma. Either they were some big traumatic event that had been causing them difficulties in the present moment, whether it was psychological difficulties or physical manifestations of those difficulties in the present moment that stopped them from being able to relate to themselves or another person. And the what they would typically think would be that their biggest work was in confronting the past. And a lot of them had even gone to therapy for 20, 30, 40 years and could frankly recite their story without thinking about it, could also then recite the multiple analyses that they had received from the psychotherapeutic community, but even though they were able to talk about it and understand it, they were still living with it inside of their body. And so the ability to start to actually get in touch with it, work through it in a way that actually had it leave the body so that it was no longer creating dysfunction, either from physical pain or numbness or psychological numbness and pain, which sometimes expresses as like anger or boredom, for instance, is those typically to go together with pain and numbness. They would get through that, they would be able to confront it, and then invariably sensation would start to come online. Because normally the spectrum is numbness, you don't feel much because your body's basically protecting you from the pain that you don't want to acknowledge or feel. And then as that pain gets released, just like a deep tissue massage, you're like, oh, wow, I need to breathe through this. And then as sensation starts to open up, it starts to feel good. And a lot of people start getting massage, they go, oh, this is feeling good. Oh, this is feeling really good. Like, oh, am I allowed to feel this good? And so you can imagine then when a person starts to feel a certain amount of physical pleasure in their body, but also starts to explore maybe the landscape of their mental arousal. And the biggest challenges and conflicts that come to them are that of, do I deserve this? Can I trust this? And where will it lead me?
Exactly.
And essentially, they're going through a psychological reconditioning away from negative conditioning, which is I'm doing something in my life to avoid getting kicked out of my house, to avoid, having the water shut off, to avoid A through Z disaster, versus I'm now living my life with a positive psychology orientation, going towards the direction of the things that I want, which now bring up self-worth, self-value. Do I deserve it when I get there? What happens when I get there? Am I enough for when I get there? Oh my goodness, I'm so great. Like, I actually don't know how to potentially deal with that because they're now having to create a whole new story around who they are and their human potential. And often, like almost always, that is 100 times scarier than just having faced the pain. But this is again part of our work, and I think it's a crucial aspect that people miss out on, because if you're simply dealing and being able to face past trauma, that's not being dead. But if you're going to truly come alive in life, then you need to be able to reconnect with
Yes.
the erotic in your life.
And a lot of marriage and couples and sex therapy, as you know, even medicine, it's pathologically oriented, meaning they're looking at all the biomarkers and all the other indicators of uh, pain and stress and conflict. And often we don't even go to get help if we are feeling good. Why would we get help? We only go when we're feeling really horrible. So one of the re-education pieces that we're doing with Embodied Love University is, yes, let's address all of those things. And guess what? Where you're at, there's so much more. And let's explore that together. Let's reorient our lens so that we're not just seeking education or support when things are about to fall apart. We're actually seeking education and support when things are amazing and we just want to discover even more. So that's the new paradigm shift that we want to give people around sexuality. Is it's not just about learning a new technique. It's not just about fixing something. It's actually like the emergent discovery of what's so extraordinary about this erotic self or this aliveness self that we all have.
Yeah, I think you guys are just pulling all the questions out of my head. I think you know me a little too well. I actually wanted to ask about that, the difference between those coming in with something that might be traumatic and wanting to overcome something, and those who are like, well, I'm fine. And right. So how we can, as you say, break through that ceiling. So my question now would be for those listening who are in the position of, well, my sex life is pretty all right. I enjoy sex and, every life's good. Like, what are some of the first things that they can be made aware of now, listening to you in their own space, that would help them, one, recognize there's a ceiling, and two, be curious enough to move through it?
Great question.
Go for it.
I want us both to answer because I think it's going to be juicy.
Yes.
We don't know what's possible unless we're invited into possibility. So when it comes to relationship and sex, our imprint is typically what we see on media or our own families. And honestly, if all you ever looked at were normal bodies and never saw something called the Olympics, you wouldn't know the human potential of how, like where the human body can go if you train it. Now, think of that, but with relationship and love and sex. We don't actually know. We don't have any real examples in the media. Most of us don't have families that really explore this to whatever extent. Like they might be functional, but we don't normally see that as an example. So one of the things we're trying to do, especially with our podcast, the explicit side, is to model, well, here's what is actually possible. Come with us here. And even if you've never been there, receiving the sound imprint, receiving actual like embodied things in action, because we do a little erotic clip of whatever it is that we're talking about. We insert that into the podcast of the embodied experience of whatever the topic is. And what's been phenomenal about that, Simone, is the breakthroughs people are having purely through the auditory, vibrational, embodied imprint of what's possible, because they didn't know that that was possible until they actually heard it. And it's different than, we're not modeling visually these moments, but I think in some ways that's good, because then people can go into their imagination and be in their own bodies a little bit more. But then within the platform itself, I have to say, like, I am stunned at all the thresholds that I keep experiencing. And when Aaron says, like, if you practice section sex, things stay interesting, like, for as long as you want it to, it's absolutely true. I can't wait to reconnect, whether it's with myself or with him. I'm amazed at, again, I'm like, that was like the most incredible ever. And then the following week, I'm like, oh, we just went again to a most incredible. And we've done this so many times that I'm like, okay, I think there's actually no end. I think this is an emergent landscape that is consistently inviting us. And if we don't have the language and the skill set, it's difficult to activate that emergent possibility. Then we just kind of loop in what we know. And that's a lot of our work, is to invite people into possibility, but also with the proper skill set so they can actually do something about possibility instead of just conceptualizing it.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. And I can, say that that's so true. The amount of times you've said how great it is, and then the next time it was even better. And I was like, hang on, didn't you say that like 5 times ago? Like, it just keeps getting better and better. There's that possibility. So that's definitely a lived experience. That's beautiful. And over to you, Aaron.
I mean, I guess there's two ways to look at this. One is, if you think you know everything, then you're definitely highly qualified as a person who doesn't. And 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 secondly, if you are a person that is curious and understands that life gives you what you put into it and what you look into, I mean, yeah, of course, everybody can walk, everybody can run, for the most part, if they are physically able bodies to do so. People that have a brain, if they're able to think, for instance. But you go to university or you join a track team, and all of a sudden you realize, oh wow, there is a lot more here that I can do that's going to take me to, just do this recreational, even to like amateur level, to then what is the professional. And the teachings that we received when it comes to especially sex and pleasure are based off of, hasn't really been updated much since Masters and Johnson's, and it's based off of a medical model of your anatomy as a system of reproduction. This is very different than understanding your anatomy as a system of pleasure.
Very, very different.
And so now, as opposed to the end goal being procreation, which has its own merits, the goal is, well, how do we actually create pleasure in the body? How do we go into these shared states of pleasure? And then you start to discover, oh, wow, what does that start to create? I mean, when we did the study that actually studied our methods, I told the researchers, I'm like, look, people are going to rate themselves rather high. We need to have a separate scale that isn't just 1 to 7, where someone puts there at a 6 or even at a 7, because then when they get something higher, they're not going to be able to. So we need to have a new scale that sets wherever you started at is 0, and then have a -7 if it gets worse and a +7 if it gets even better than that. And that's exactly what happened, because people do not understand the capabilities that they could have until they begin to experience it. I mean, it's the same thing when you look at people, it's like, yeah, okay, my body's in decent shape. I don't really get winded. But all of a sudden they start to really train their body and they see the transformation that happens, or even our basic understanding of mathematics or chemistry. Who would think that it would go to the levels that we have all these incredible inventions that are happening strictly because someone has dove deeper into it and didn't just go, oh, well, I know everything.
Or also with what Simone is saying with voice. So many of us think I can't sing, I will never sing, singing's not for me, I have a horrible voice, all those things that we say to ourselves. And then the way that you invite people into possibility, they discover something beyond just their speaking voice. And they discover that the way in which they use their voice, it is an act of intimacy. It's an act of creation. It's an act of such beauty. And I mean, it's from spiritual to sexual to everything. And I think from that lens, you can understand where we're coming from in terms of inviting people into their greater possibility relationally and sexually.
And typically the shift that people notice happens very quickly. They're like, oh wait, I've been pedaling with my arms on this bicycle and I could have just used my legs and had my hands on the steering wheel. And I'm sure that it's the same for you when you coach people on singing, because what they think they need to do to be able to sing by the
Yeah.
opposite actually of what they need to do, which is frankly a lot of effort and a lot of strain to just be louder. And in our case,
Yeah.
it's about being harder and faster and bigger or tighter. And so
Yeah, exactly. It is embodied when you're connected to your voice, that, as you say, act of self-love. And I think for what I'm understanding is when I put my compositions out, it's the, I guess, the parallel of you creating the experience for people to hear and feel and sense into possibility and what's the kind of, like I spoke about right at the start, that current and frequency that you emit because you're embodying the work that you're doing. And I will say, and I'll ask you about this, but I'll start by celebrating you both because you spoke about the word responsibility. And I know we've had conversations about this before outside of this context, the responsibility that we have in the work we do to hold space in a way that's within integrity. And it's not just about, oh, here, do this, do this. It's this matters. And this is why you need to do it this way. And I'd like to speak about that piece in your work because in the sexual wellness industry, there's been a lot of stuff thrown out there. I mean, we can see it all the time. Everyone is teaching their version of using the jade egg. Everyone's showing their, what are the pieces that you feel are missing in that broad general sexual wellness that you are really taking that level of responsibility on? Because I think it's lacking in many places. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Well, actually, I love, love, love that you asked this question and how we're designing. So the Embodied Love University, you can come in either as a for personal reason as an explorer, or there's also going to be a professional gateway as well. But let's just look at personally. And the journey begins where you come in and you create your own profile and the system will be attuning to you. But every single person, before they get something really specific to them, first needs to go through a basic training that we feel every single person on the planet needs, doesn't matter where they are, what level they're at, what age, anything, that these basic pieces, if that's all they knew, would completely revolutionize their life. And if it's their foundation, where they can go is endless. So those foundational pieces are actually part of the experience of onboarding. You get your email, you get your profile, and then suddenly you're in this training, and it's a series of very specific trainings that we have woven together. And I love Aaron to draw the specificities. We just actually finished filming those last week. It's quite exciting to put those forward, and I'm really curious what the impact will be when people start to understand, oh, I knew this, but I didn't know that, and it really feels different when I know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
So those foundational pieces are essentially the first piece, just because we wanted to give people something visual to be able to understand their body differently, was doing exactly what I just mentioned about presenting an anatomical system of pleasure. So looking at anatomy from a system of pleasure perspective as opposed to reproduction. Second foundational piece is then understanding, well, how do the body mechanics work so that I can start to actually activate my anatomy as a system of pleasure. So then people start to have an experience to match the conceptual knowledge and these kind of anatomical maps that they see visually on a screen. All of a sudden, they start to feel what that feels like in their body. And this is a huge piece that is missing in education, which is a lot of sex education focuses just on how do you identify versus how do you actually start to feel your body. So that way, then you can even figure out how it is that you identify based off of the
Yeah.
experiences that you have.
I want to just interject
Mhm.
quickly. It's really important to note that globally, there is this thing understood that it is a human right to have comprehensive sexuality in education. But when I looked into it, what that means is identity, gender, STIs, and there's a refusal to actually give people real substantial information on the actual act of sex. Like so it's like telling people about the beautiful car and the color of the paint on the car and the make of the car, but
And even choose a car.
we never teach them how to actually drive it properly.
Or
So
what's under the hood.
exactly, there's no understanding of any of that. So then there's another body of people who came forward and said, did a declaration that it's actually a basic human right to experience pleasure through sexuality. And so our platform is really devoted to that human right, that you have the right to experience pleasure on a daily basis. And here's specifically how you can do that, because that is what is missing everywhere, is that specificity. Sorry to interject,
No, that's
but I
great.
wanted to just put that in
Yeah.
there.
Brilliant. Thank you.
As you can see now, they start to then be able to figure out, okay, well, this is how I can generate pleasure inside of my body. Well, the next piece, though, is what about mental arousal? Because this is a big one for all of us. And most people are thinking of mental arousal as like an act that you do or a certain way that you dress, as opposed to really understanding, well, what are the psychodynamics beneath mental arousal and understanding the entire landscape, so that way you can see where you have strengths, where you maybe want to explore, where you're not quite able to go into that yet. So you have some avoidance because it brings up different emotions, which then brings us to the fourth foundational piece. And this really works with, well, once you've faced either your pains or start to push the limits of your pleasure, are you able to regulate, self-regulate your nervous system? Are you able to also be able to talk to another person and express what it is that you want or don't want, which then is that other foundational piece. And I'd actually say that's the fifth foundational piece, because the fourth one is understanding. This is actually the third before we got to mental arousal, is understanding one's nervous system, because we are geared to find physical pleasure, but even mental arousal pleasure, typically in the sympathetic state, which is very much this shock and awe and have a very quick fire that kind of extinguishes quickly. You have this linear model of arousal that leads to a refractory period, both for any person. And then if you look at what we're teaching, is actually giving people a different experience of sex with the parasympathetic state, the ability to actually relax into pleasure and go into what Dr. Saida talks about with relaxed arousal. I still like calling her Dr. Saida. I think that's maybe one of my mental arousal pieces. But,
I like
but
that. Yes.
so that progression, though, just to reiterate it, is sexual anatomy, body mechanics, understanding how to work that with that sexual anatomy, understanding the physiology of being in the parasympathetic versus sympathetic state, which is relaxed arousal, and how to wield that, because it takes out a lot of the anxiety. It allows for lovemaking to become this meditative, long experience between the two of you, or as well finding something that's short, compressed, and absolutely amazing, because it turns it into that dance between those two nervous systems, as opposed to just shorting you out, which then we go into mental arousal, and then specifically how to embody consent as well as self-regulate. So that way then not only are you getting the ability to go into pleasure, face numbness and pain, either psychological or physical, but then you're going to be, and this is what she was talking about, that inner cycle of truth, responsibility, trust, and celebration. You're going to be able to go, well, okay, am I in conflict mode now, or do I have an open heart? Because the way that I'm going to state my truth is going to come out very different. Can I be responsible with my own truth to then actually show up for ourselves, but in a partnership in a different way, and then have that pleasure actually fuel the interactions that are necessary to create those shared values for a successful relationship, even if it is just a one night stand or a lifelong together, having kids, children's, and family.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I want to look at the kind of follow on of this, because I know for myself, some of my most creative times are in that state of arousal where I've had a moment of self-pleasure, and it wasn't about, okay, let's have an orgasm. It was just, I just want to feel good in my body and my energy. I just want to feel good. And then I'm like, right, let me go in front of the microphone and blah, let whatever wants to come out. And some really beautiful things happen there. And I want to talk a little bit of the scientific piece behind this, whether you want to look at kind of like the neuro side or the chemistry, whichever angle you want to take it. I would love to speak about what's happening in our system when we're inviting pleasure into it.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because I was like, I want to add to the
Oh,
relax.
good. I told you you're reading my mind.
Well, that's what happens.
Yes.
So I want to go deeper into relaxed arousal, why it's so important, why it's revolutionary in some ways, and it will answer your question as well. So as Aaron was mentioning, there's the sympathetic arousal response, which is what you see in porn, it's what you see in movies, it's what most of us think of when we think of sex. And it's arousal is actually a sympathetic thing. You have to like get aroused, your heart rate goes up, you get a little sweaty, your eyes are flashy, you're looking around. But if you only stay in that state, things kind of end fairly quickly. And then there's, as he was explaining, a refractory period where you may not even be interested in each other. You're like, I'm done, don't talk to me, don't look at me. So if we want to create a sense of like, hey, I'd like more, and can we connect, and more of this magnetic connection, then it's important that people also understand how to bring themselves into a state of relaxation while being aroused. And some of the research around that is super fascinating. So one of our friends, Dr. Lauren Davis, she spoke about how our biological systems evolved. And if we look at that from the most simplistic point of view, vibration was registered in our nervous system as something scary, like alarming, pay attention, because it usually meant a big animal was coming, or there was an earthquake or thunder, or a big boulder just fell. Like, so any kind of vibration in the nervous system gets the sympathetic system going. So what is the predominant thing that we are empowering women with right now? Is vibrational sex. So essentially, that's fine if that's your first step toward exploring your own body. It's just not where it ends. There's just so much more to your body. And sometimes, sure, yeah, to kickstart things. But once you understand, like, okay, that was a sympathetic orgasm, because many women who do that a lot come to me and also to Aaron say, I feel really low energy after that. I don't want connection. I'm, kind of feeling low and depressed. Why
Or at
is
least
that?
I need to quit stimulating because it's just too much.
Too much. So that's one of the typical like glorified ways right now, because it's a huge billion-dollar industry to sell toys to everyone. But it's also a privileged industry because the majority of the world can't actually afford those toys or don't have batteries or electricity to use them.
Yeah.
So there's another way. Same thing with, say, a male body that's observing porn and hunched over and going very quickly and then to orgasm. That's a sympathetic entrainment. So she also mentioned then, however, is gentle, consistent pressure, which is what happens when you explore your body as a system of pleasure, because you're really looking for sensation in a different way. And in Aaron's technology of suction sex, you're actually looking for where is that magnetic point between either your finger and your own body, or your finger or any body part with any body part. What is that magnetic place of suction? She said in that, what that does is gets you into the parasympathetic. Your body registers consistent, gentle pressure as a so that's super crucial in a world that's very stressed right now, very dysregulated, very disconnected, and very divided. The way to bring us back together is first to bring ourselves back into feeling, into connection, first here, just with ourselves, and to touch our bodies, to make love to ourselves first, and then eventually with a partner in a way that's actually supporting us to be more resilient in the world, to be more curious in the world, and to also be able to access that frontal lobe, which is the place of innovation and genius, which you cannot access when you're in the sympathetic. So, what I love about all this technology is essentially if more and more of us, I'll say when more and more of us engage in it, what we're doing is creating a healthier and healthier, more robust population that has availability to the full spectrum of human experience, not just the hyper arousal, go, 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 do, and head to burnout and head to stress and head to, drama and I hate everything, to I actually feel you and I feel good and I'm well resourced and I can be here for you. And here's what I want to bring forward as a creative option. That kind of human being is what we need right now. And that's the kind of invitation that the platform is really giving in terms of bringing in that skill set, first at a very basic level. But once you do those foundational pieces, everything else, and there's probably hundreds, if not close to 1,000 videos and trainings that people can go through over a very long period of time. And they're all based on this methodology. So it's not like you're suddenly going to get thrown into something weird and foreign. Your foundation actually is going to carry you forward.
I mean,
Yeah,
if you don't
teaches
do
that
anything
foundational
else,
piece.
yeah, even if you don't do anything else in those foundational pieces, it's going to fundamentally change the way that you understand, orient, therefore think and move through a sexual experience. I just wanted to add on to what Dr. Saida said, because I think sometimes people get the impression that, oh, suction sex means that it's slow sex because you're feeling into and therefore you're doing like rhythmic, deeper pulses and sensations and feeling into each other. But I think the thing about relaxed arousal, it doesn't mean that you are asleep and not moving. It's similar to like when you dance. There's two main things that there was her name is Bridget Freehart. She does studies on sexual physiological synchronicity and looking at how that compares to sexual satisfaction. She's also works with another lady from it's the University of Austin, Texas, Meston, and shout out to them, love your work. But they talk about the two crucial factors for sexual satisfaction are awareness of the self and attunement to a partner. So if you think about what that means, like for instance, in the dance world, because I think people maybe are more familiar with the dance world, is that you would be aware of where your body is in space. You attune to your partner, and then literally the tempo, the cadence, the pace, the rhythm, you follow the music and that synergy that's created between the two of you. And you could be doing very physically demanding moves, but because you are aware of yourself and attuned to one another, you're relaxed in that, which allows you to be very precise. The same way I imagine when you are just belting out a song and really feeling and going into it, you're not exhausting yourself. You're not, straining your vocal cords, but you've learned how to be in a state of relaxed arousal. And that simply is not something that you see in either just a candlelit movie where everything's just moving very slowly and slow strokes, or the kind of more just wham bam, thank you, bed breaks, and it's one of those two extremes that amazing sex happens at. But this is really like, how do you tune into each other? Where is the jazz in your sex life? Because that's what sex and sex brings. It allows you to become improvisational, curious, and do that fully attuned to one another. And then the routine doesn't exist because you're just following wherever the body is at that moment, in that day, in that combination. And then that unlocks a certain level of pleasure that, as opposed to short-circuiting your system where you're like, okay, I've had enough. Now it's time to turn away from my partner. Dopamine levels drop, oxytocin levels drop, vasopressin levels drop, and then you have a very strong spike in prolactin, which is like, okay, I've had enough for now. And so then you're not connecting versus keeping that high, keeping that magnetism between one another, and then being able to understand how arousal from this state actually helps you rebalance your nervous system, and it energizes you in your communications and in creating your shared values.
There's so much to pull from that. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
I'll say that in my own experience, and I think you mentioned a while back mental arousal, and I find that fascinating because I talk a lot about this in my work with voice. And it's like kind of, why does sweet talk work, right? If someone is saying something and they're saying all these lovely things to you, you're more likely to be expanded. You're more likely to feel like you can open your legs, literally. You feel that differently. If someone is saying all of these awful things to you, there's contraction, and then you want to kind of close off, right? And what I've noticed in my own experience in reconnecting is that when you have the awareness of pleasure and sex can be a way to reconnect, as you said earlier, Saida, which is you can bring the celebration in so that you're open to listen to each other's truth. That's worked for me a lot in my own personal relationships, where I go, I'm a really like, I need to release, I need to let go. I go off on my own, I come back, let's do it. And then you feel like, right, now we're on the same page, even if it's just for a moment in time that allows you to reconnect and remember, as you said, each other, which I think is really, really profound. Now, you use the analogy of music, dance, attunement, awareness, bringing, you said something along the lines of, Aaron, like, you hear the music and you're moving together and you tune to each other's bodies and your own body in space. And you can both answer this. And I know this is a kind of a strange question, but I know you're going to go where I know you'll go, which is what is the music in your work? In that example, what's the music? We have two bodies, we have space, we have us attuning and being aware. What's the music element?
Well, for me, and this is something that I developed first initially as a solo practice, and then became a lot more aware of it in partnered experience. But it's the attunement to my own sensation, and more specifically, the attunement to a current that we call pleasure, or something that feels like yummy. And if I'm self-pleasuring, then I'm sensing into, well, where is that, constellation today, because my body's always changing. And so it doesn't want the same kind of touches every day. So I attune, I'm like, oh, there it is. I need to move this way. And I'm just following it. There's no real thinking. That's the music for me. It's where is it? And sometimes it gets really quiet, and sometimes it's so like it's a tsunami. And again, just following that and allowing it to take over and trusting it in a profound way, which has led us and me into really profound psychedelic states without any substances, but just through bodily connection and breath, and also beyond psychedelic states into what I would call more like spiritual, expanded oneness states with life. And that's all because of this attunement to that, again, that current of life, that erotic aliveness that's moving through and consistently knows it's intelligent and knows what it wants. And all I need to do is pay attention and say yes and move in that direction. And what I think makes an incredibly skilled lover is a partner who can also attune to that, not only in themselves, that's number one, but also in then the other. And I think that initially with Aaron and I, when we were first kind of starting to explore, sometimes we weren't always physically in the same space. And I was mind blown that he could attune to that current in my body being like halfway across the world or whatever. And like, wow, he's more tuned in, not even present with me in physical form, than any person has ever been in when they were physically with me. What is going on, right? And so that for me is the music. And when you can start hearing it, there's no limit to where you can go.
No limit. I like that. What's the music, Aaron?
Well, I would agree with her completely on the music is this erotic aliveness, pleasure current. I think it's It's what drives a person probably when they're making music, or is when they're on the dance floor, when they're running, whatever it is that really inspires them. And then it expresses itself in whatever their art form might be that they are really diving into. I think how I'll answer this then, just to give some practicalities, is well, you need to be able to also feel the music, because a lot of us shut ourselves off because either it's created pain in the past, it creates current pain, or we just don't really understand where it might lead. And the ability to just start to breathe more deeply and feel your entire body, the ability to actually connect to your own heartbeat, just to feel that there. I mean, this is one of the like old school practices and therapies for helping people that have body dysmorphia, is literally helping them become more interoceptively aware, which is, starting with your heartbeat. So if you can then become aware of your own breath, your own heartbeat, start to feel in your own body, and then connect to that breath and that heartbeat of a partner, that would be a way to even like give you the beat, let's say, for the music that then starts to move the body, create that synchronicity. And then as the breath, as the movement, as the heartbeat starts to change by going up or down, the beat changes and the expression of that music changes as well. But that's a quick way to really start to connect to the pleasure that is the music.
I love that.
I'm laughing because occasionally we've worn like heart monitors just because we're science geeks. We're like, let's test out what's going on when we're having fun. And my heart rate would drop so low, it wasn't even on the screen anymore, even if I was having ecstatic orgasms, because I would enter a profound state of relaxed arousal. It was so relaxed that it was like, are you alive? But my rhythm was actually quite slow, even if at the same time, maybe Aaron's rhythm was much higher because he was doing more of the physical exertion at that point.
Well, also too, your body you start to feel that there's literally an inertial force of the pleasure, of the physicality. This is something that's holistic. It's not just one little thing. You can always focus on one thing to measure, but the experience of it is the entirety. And there's an inertial force that goes there. The same thing with surfing. You don't surf against the wave, you surf with the wave, unless you're wanting to do a very specific thing to then go again and be with that wave. But the whole purpose of this really is starting to then develop that attunement to not just the other person, but the unit that the two of you make, and then just start to go on these incredible explorations. And we broke it down rather simply there, but trust me, there are a lot of body mechanics that we do the opposite of. I mean, if you think about, just look at your normal sexual scene in either porn or in a hot, heavy scene where everyone starts to like do shallow breathing faster, they may even like sweating, bodies are tense, the faces are tight, or they're just like
So good
sitting
for
there like
acting.
looking at each other eyes and melting, and then it's very soft touches. And well, that's very external, like, embodiment that we're seeing that doesn't really facilitate the experience we're speaking about.
Yeah.
And secondly, the advice that we're getting typically is outsourcing different types of toys or tools, maybe a sex position, but well, what do you do in that sex position? What are the internal body mechanics that happen? How do those sync together? And then how does that actually show itself in reality, which is very different than the strain of
Yes.
trying to make sensation happen.
Yeah.
It's everything
Okay.
from pelvic floor to breath to hip movements to how you're moving your internal sexual anatomy. How are you interacting with your mind and mental
Your
arousal? How do
voice.
you use your voice to create vibrations, express yourself to also stay connected to your emotions? And then how do you communicate about these fantasies and mental arousals that create turn-ons that don't end up like, sidetracking everything? And like there's literally such a rich landscape here. And why, again, we created the Embodied Love University is we realized just having a course, this isn't going to really help you on what needs to be a lifelong journey in the same way that learning to eat correctly, learning to train correctly, how to educate yourself, that is significant throughout your life. And at different points in your life, it takes different forms, and everyone's journey starts slightly differently. And so that's exactly what we've done in Embodied Love University. And most importantly, is having a community within which to express and live this out is a very key fundamental piece, and why then we call it a university-like experience.
Yes, that's beautiful. And I mean, it's like learning the scales before you learn how to improvise. And there are many different types of scales, right? And that foundation piece that you've spoken about is super important. Do people tell me about the university, Embodied Love University? Is there an application process like you might have for a university? What do people need to know about if they want to come in, be part of this community, get that foundation piece? What do they need to do?
Basically, if you have an email address, you qualify. You're
Woohoo!
curious
Easy
about-
application.
Yeah, what we wanted to do is, because it's an urgent humanitarian need. People need to be educated this way. We firmly believe that if people are happier, more connected, more stable together, our societies will be more stable and a better place for everybody. So we have this urgent call to make this information available to everyone. Therefore, the first level of it is completely free. We've gamified it so that the more you engage, the longer you're there, the more you unlock. So we wanted to kind of gamify it. And if you bring friends, and so all of that, we do have paid levels of membership. You don't need to apply for the first few. The very last one, the bespoke level, there is an application process, just because we only have a certain amount of time and we need to understand if we can actually really help someone or not. But yes, in that sense,
or who to recommend them to, because we'll be then interacting with them directly.
Yeah. And then if you are a professional who's interested in research, there is that leg. Or if you want to be certified in, say, embodied psychosexual method, which is a program I have for doctors, therapists, anyone who's really working with human beings, and they want to understand a little bit more how to bring this conversation in, then that certification process is on the professional side, and there are application processes for those.
Amazing. Amazing. Listeners, you have an email address, you know what to do. Of course, I'm going to be putting all of your details and all the links. And I will say now we have to have a part 2, because there's so much notes that I've written that we won't have time to go through today. But this is a beautiful reintroduction, and certainly introduction of your collaboration, which I'm so excited about, for everyone to jump in and really come on board and learn the much needed work around pleasure and embodied love, which I love, and I love you too. I will put all of your details, and I like to kind of wrap up the episode with the same question to all of my guests. And I'll start with you, Saida. It's the same question, and then over to you, Aaron. And that is, what is your soulful sound to the world? And that's just a prayer or desire that you wish upon the world.
Well, I've thought about this a lot, and I wish that everyone could know what it's like to rest deeply in themselves with that sense of connection, self-connection, that aliveness. It's so magical, and there's nothing that comes close to it. So I guess that's that inner peace that's connected with your turn on and your love of living. That state of being is what I would wish for everyone.
Oh, thank you. Aaron.
I took your question rather literally, and so my mind started going, But I guess to give a more verbal answer to that would be that people could experience their body making the sounds of pleasure that come out of them without them even needing to think about it, to the point where they're even like, whoa, is that my voice? And if they can have those feelings, that felt state, that sound in their body, in their sex life, in their communications with their partner, and in the accomplishments that they have in their shared values, whether it's reflecting in the moment or dreaming into the future, that would be my wish.
Oh, and so it is. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Yay, it was such a pleasure.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you for having us.
Thank you. If you loved this episode, hit that like and subscribe button and make sure to check out our other episodes. Thank you so much for tuning in, sending you love, healing, and sound wherever you are.